Well, today is the feast of Corpus Christi, which is Latin for body of Christ, the Eucharist, communion, a special feast dedicated to the Eucharist. And I imagine a lot of people here come every week and receive the Eucharist every week, and probably have been doing it for a long time. Some people my age for a very long time. Some of you for less time. And sometimes when we do something on a regular basis, it becomes part of a routine. Sometimes we say, well, I better get my obligation and go to Mass, and that's fine. But over the course of time, sometimes we see things in a more routine way. Having this special feast day in honor of the Eucharist gives us an opportunity to revitalize the joy of what it really is to receive the body of Christ. And so I want to take everybody back in time when it probably was a very, very joyful time for every one of you, and myself included, to receive the Eucharist. And that was the time of our first communion. So I have a picture to put on the board here. Should pop up. Well, maybe it'll pop up. There it is. I was 7 years old. That was taken for my first communion. And St. Mary's of Wayne, and I was 7 years old. Look at all that hair. Oh my gosh. I tell you, I think that's the last time anybody ever called me cute. Now I thought, just a few weeks back we celebrated First Communion because it's a very special day. These children are very excited. They're they're really wanting to receive the Lord. There's a great joy in them. They can't wait for it. And I invite them up to sit on the platform with me. I thought about doing that with all of you, but some of you I don't think you'd get back up. So I thought I'd keep you in the pews. That's probably a good idea. But let's think back to our first communions. Let's think back. Because I bet everybody remembers your first communion. So back in 1964 at St. Mary's in Wayne, I remember going through the old CCD. That's what they used to call religious ed for the kids that weren't in Catholic school, CCD. And my teacher was Mr. Pahalski. I remember his name. And he was very kind to us. And he taught us a lot of how exciting it's going to be when you get to receive the Lord for the very first time. And I remember that day, that morning. I was excited for a whole lot of reasons. I was excited because my godmother, my first cousin Barbara, was coming in from Indiana. I was excited because a lot of the relations and family were going to come to this Mass. I was excited because there was going to be a party after. We were going to have cake. But I also was excited because I was going to receive the Lord. So I remember that day, and it was the last year of the Latin Mass. And so Father Haiti did the Mass in Latin with his back to me. I didn't understand a word, but I watched diligently. And it came time for communion, and they had the old communion rail, and the altar servers flopped the cloths over it, and we got on our knees, and the altar saint came by with the paten, and Father Haiti gave me communion. And I remember two things in particular. One, I didn't swallow it right away. I kept it until I got back in the pew, and then I decided to swallow it. And then I wondered if I did it wrong by waiting so long. Hey, you're 7 years old, right? And the other thing I remember is all the boys were on one side. This is the height of the baby boom, so there's tons of kids. We had over 100 people receiving First Communion. And the boys were on one side of the main aisle, and the girls were on the other side. Families were all in the back and on the wings back then. They didn't have family faith sharing program back then. And the girls exited first, and we went out the old front door down the steep steps. And what I remember is by the time the boys got to the door, the girls looked like they had formed a giant white pond, all in their veils, with all their parents taking pictures with the old flash bulbs. Remember those? Because they didn't allow those in the church outside. And I remember as the boys filtered in, they looked like little black fish in a white sea. It's very pretty, the things you remember. But that was a joy of receiving the Lord for the first time. And so I challenge everyone to think about your first communions, because how many days do we really remember in our lives? Not many. But that's the day everyone usually remembers. Think about how joyful you were, how uplifted you were, how excited you were to receive the Lord, and realize that same excitement, that same joy is there, because that same Lord you received for the very first time, you're going to receive it again today. Now, to conclude my homily and in honor of this feast day, I'm going to play a piece by Mozart written for Corpus Christi called Ave Verum.